Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, what role can our aging population play in the workforce? Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Malia. Layoffs, downsizing, insufficient retirement savings, and even new technology have forced many older workers back into the job market. Some have been able to retool their resumes or pick up new skills. Others find themselves competing for entry-level jobs with recent college graduates who are both tech-savvy and armed with the latest research. What role can our aging population play in the workplace? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our guests. Jack Bates is Senior Advisor for Marketing Matters at Olelo Community Media. Prior to that, Jack was the Chairman and CEO of Starr Seagull Communications before retiring in 2003. Jerry Silva has been the volunteer state president for AARP Hawaii since 2013. Jerry is a retired Army colonel who served more than a decade as chief of staff for the Hawaii Army National Guard. Cullen Hayashida is the director of Kapiolani Community College's Kupuna Education Center. Cullen has been involved in workplace development to address the needs of retirees and to keep active retirees engaged. Dwight Takamine has been the director of the State Department of Labor and Industrial Relations since 2010. He also served in the state legislature for 26 years, sitting on committees on labor, public employment, and finance. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Dwight, may I start with you? Could you give us a snapshot of this trend of aging or older workers re-entering or staying in the workforce?
Sure. I think it's always good to know what we're dealing with. And I think in Hawaii, if we were to look back, say, 2 decades ago, if we were to focus on those employees in our workforce who are 55 years or older, the group was about at 12.5% of the total workforce. Fast forwarding to 2013 or 18 years later, we see that the percentage has increased to 22.3%, so almost a doubling. And with our workforce at about 620,000 people now, that amounts to about almost 140,000 people who are 55 years or older. Now, what kinds of jobs do they have? And so given our workforce, we do keep track of numbers in different industries. And it seems to be that the number of older workers is a reflection of the rest of the members of the workforce, and that is in our 4 largest industries or category breakdowns. The numbers look a little bit like this. For accommodation and food service, which is the largest, and of course our tourism industry would be included in that, employees 55 years or older amount to about 15% of that. In healthcare and social assistance, of course, that's a critical industry, especially when you talk about the health of our seniors, population. The 55-year and older employees are about 13% in that industry. Moving on to retail trade, which is the 3rd largest, again, about 11.5% of these 55-year-old workers comprise that segment. And in administration and support and waste management, about 10%.
So these are significant numbers of our employee work base. In terms of AARP, are you seeing this reflected in terms of where the priorities of your membership are right now, in terms of continuing to work versus a classic retirement situation?
Well, first of all, we recognize that people are living longer, and that means in some cases they're going to work longer or they're going to do other things. So we've got a program called Life Reimagined, which includes Work Reimagined, and it's a program to help people make those transitions. You're absolutely right. It's a transitional life these days.
So in terms of, Cullen, what challenges do you see in terms of those that you're working with in terms of making this re-entry or continuation to the workforce? Are there any barriers involved, or is it an easy thing to do?
Well, we're finding that people are retiring without much planning. When young people in high school plan for their college or their post-high school years, they go through counseling as far as employment and for career counseling. When there's a lot of time that is spent in terms of looking at aptitude tests, and there's a lot of thought that goes to this process. But then when we look at this next transition from employment to retirement, there's not that much that we put into that particular time. And when we think about it, that's 20 to 30 productive years that we have left. And so people are leaving not realizing that work is more than just money. It's status, it's part of your identity. And when they sort of just drop off the cliff, they find that they've lost a lot, and people sometimes even get sick. So there's a huge issue with regards to how can we somehow find this life reimagined. How can we provide them with an encore career?
This next step. Jack, what made you go back to work?
But other than my wife, you mean? I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I was doing some consulting, and that was going fine, but I was doing it from the house, and that was proving to be the conflict, frankly. But no, I just missed it, and I don't know. I guess I don't know what I'd do if I wasn't working. So.
How long did it take for you to make that decision? Because it is
was
quite
rather
tempting,
quick, actually.
right?
Yeah, no, because what I was doing was going okay. But the fact was, it was in the home, and there were interruptions, or I'd be traveling a lot in connection with it, and that was a problem. And so I just decided that I got convinced, anyway, that I should go out and look. And that's when the fun started, really, is trying to then find something that you wanted to do, and convincing people that you weren't there to run the company, and that you could take direction from somebody else. You just wanted to have some fun and do the things that you were good at. Yeah.
So having gone through that, what would be your advice to someone in the same situation in terms of what are some of the pitfalls to avoid when you decide to take this step back into the workforce?
I think the first thing is you've got to network. You've got to talk to people that you know that are in positions or companies that are related to the field you want to be in. Because if you go to the average HR director and say, I'd like to apply for a job here, they're going to look at you at their age group of about 24, I think, in general, and say, you're an old man, are you kidding me? And but if you network and you have a friend in an organization you'd like to join, it's amazing. But then, and that's exactly kind of what happened in my case at Olelo. I had talked to some people about it, and 6 months, 7 months before, and then suddenly they did have an opportunity where they wanted to talk.
And the timing worked out.
And the timing worked out.
I'm sorry.
Well, given this transition, because that's going to become more and more important, as we move forward as a state. And it seems as though, the governor in the New Beginning, talked about our Kupuna as a treasured asset, both, economically and socially. And as we look at, this older workforce, it seems as though there's a number of advantages there. Sometimes in our workforce development program, we get approached by employers who are looking for, new employees who will show up every day at work and, show up on time. And when you look at this older workforce, many of them have a certain work ethic. They have certain attitudes about respecting, one another, and certainly do show up on time and,
maturity.
Exactly. And so that's sort of an asset, yeah?
We have our first question. What is the main reason given for 55 and older remaining in the workforce? Mike from Hawaii Kai, is it economics primarily, or is it that sense of accomplishment and needing something to do and making your wife happy you're out of the house? Where do you think it falls? Economics?
Some people need to work. We've had that 2008, crash, and people find that their pensions is not where it's supposed to be or should have been, and so they need to find a job. But there are many other people that find that, it's something that they want to do, and many of them have their pensions and they've got their health plans covered, and so. At that point, it's not a matter of making a lot of money. perhaps making perhaps even half the amount that they were making before is okay. The money, of course, is a way of sort of recognition that they worth something. But more than that, then they can begin to focus on some things that they're passionate about. Maybe it's homelessness, maybe it's education for the young kids, maybe it's the environment, whatever it is. This is when they can really make a difference. And this is an opportunity for many of these types of people that have the skills to look at nonprofits. Mm-hmm. Nonprofits really need good skills, but they don't have the resources oftentimes. So the match makes an opportunity happen.
PBS NewsHour did a great piece on this about 2 weeks ago, and there are a lot of stats in there if you want to look at them. But bottom line is the great majority of people who are working now are happy working, even beyond the normal retirement time.
To add to that, the Executive Office of Aging put out a report back in, just last year, and they cited that about 45% of those older workers cited financial considerations as a major concern.
45,
but that almost 2/3 cited enjoyment at work, the self-satisfaction you get from that.
The majority. Here's a question from Brandon in Kailua. Is there prejudice against mid-career professionals who are suddenly back on the market due to layoffs and downsizing? Do you think that, there is sort of that barrier for people who are having to re-enter under perhaps less fortunate circumstances? Your thoughts, Chuck?
Well, I came from an industry where youth is everything, being in advertising, and so I did see that. And I think that is an obstacle that has to be overcome. And again, I really like your point on nonprofits. I really think that's the area that you've got this great pool of talent out there, and nonprofits generally cannot afford the kinds of salaries that private corporations can, or even the state for that matter. And that's where I was going, because I'd always been involved with nonprofits. And so Olelo came along, and yes, you don't make the kind of money you used to make, but I'm doing what I want to do.
For those re-entering the workforce, is it possible for those who want to be able to regain the kind of salary that perhaps they went out at? Or do they need to come to terms with the fact that as you re-enter, you might need to adjust? Because for an employer, if they've got the choice of a younger person who's willing to do a lower salary and someone coming in with those higher expectations, have you found that to be something that your members need to adjust to?
Well, number one, we do a lot of surveys, and you're right, that typically somebody re-entering the workforce is going to take maybe a 15% reduction. But the other thing is that, we strongly believe that there's a lot of value in the experience that older people bring to the job.
Have you found that in terms of the outreach you've done?
We've, I think we agree, that the amount that older adults oftentimes go into employment at that older age is going to experience a reduction in their salaries. But we're hoping that can be counterbalanced with the pension that they have, maybe Medicare that covers some of the healthcare costs and that sort of thing, so that it still can result in a livable wage.
They've got supplemental income from other forces, leaving them the freedom to do nonprofit and other work. Dwight, is there a downside to this for sort of the next generation, the next two generations, in that if we have these incredibly qualified older workers staying in these positions longer or going back into them, is there sort of, especially in Hawaii, where we're a smaller community with limited job opportunities, do we get sort of a traffic jam? And do we run the risk of sort of the younger generation deciding I've got to go elsewhere if I want opportunities, because we've got this very, very qualified older generation still working? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that is our challenge, Certainly how to take advantage of the assets that the older workers bring with them. Certainly the institutional knowledge, and we see that real clearly in the state, that a lot of the workers who, carry the water for us tend to be the older workers who have been there for a while and have learned the many, important lessons. But you're right. At a certain point in time, the baby boomers, will move into, will be transitioning into retirement, and who will be there, to take their place. One thing I think, and even the community colleges have seen, long-term care, the adjustment to that. it actually has a lot of impact in terms of the kinds of workers you're going to need. If you're talking about aging, in place in home, then certainly, CNAs, certainly, chore services people, type of workers, and we need to make sure that the training occurs so that, these workers will be there to provide for the needs.
Because we're already facing a doctor shortage, right? And it's only going to get more dramatic as our baby boomer generation has. Is that something that concerns you, Jerry?
Well, certainly. Right now the state has a doctor shortage of about 747. By the time we get to 2020, it'll be about 1,400. So it definitely concerns us. And that means that, among other things, just the paradigm of providing care is going to have to change to accommodate that. So yes, there are opportunities and there are downsides as well.
Now, are those care needs ones that you see older workers filling, or that's something definitely for the younger generations to step in and do?
No, I think there's a place for older workers in there as well. There are a lot of things that, in terms of caregiving, that don't require a lot of physical strength.
Have you seen that yourself?
Well, I'm not quite certain about the number of older workers that can actually do the heavy lifting, like you said. There may be other sorts of skill sets that they can provide. Just by being engaged and being employed will also keep them healthier longer. I was talking to a geriatric psychiatrist, for example, the other day, and he was saying that with his studies on Alzheimer's, those that continue to work, the older adults that continue to work, seem to show about a 3 to 5% reduction in the onset of dementia. So it has some very positive effect on your health to, use it or lose it.
Like doing crosswords all day long.
Well, Sudoku or something.
Sudoku, right.
I think that goes right back to the point Jack made, that transitioning and being able to have a sense of satisfaction that you're giving back, to the community, to engage in, private nonprofit work, that sort of thing. And I think part of our challenge in looking at the future of Hawaii is to be able to make sure we have those support pieces and that facilitate, that kind of positive transitioning, so that we don't end up with sort of what could be a depression kind of situation.
And I'd like to think in terms of work, not just necessarily in terms of employment for pay. Work can be, people might have a passion for volunteerism, and doing some things that can be for the greater good. And so if we look at work in a broader sense in terms of engagement, perhaps that's perhaps a better way for us to think in terms of the state strategy or the state plan for this older population. Because if we can keep this population well and engaged, and perhaps the pressure on long-term care can be moderated, and the cost to the state perhaps might be even lessened as well.
Well, it certainly helps economically, right? Because we need a certain amount of wage earners to be able to support those who have moved into retirement. And so the longer we can keep this larger generation working, the better for our economy, right?
Exactly, because of the tremendous costs of health care, right? We're seeing it at many different levels, and therefore, being proactive, keeping people engaged, volunteerism, all of these kinds of programs that would support, that kind of situation, I think would be helpful.
Healthcare is expensive because, our stats show that if a couple is 65 years old, by the time they're finally finished, they will probably spend about $240,000 on healthcare, and we're not even talking about long-term care.
It seems to me that we've kind of built a brick wall. There's a kind of a roadblock here because we've had, for 50, 60 years or longer, a retirement age of 65. And people are not in the same condition at 65 anymore they were back then. And I'm wondering, but there is that resistance out there when you hit the roadblock of 65. I told Malia the other day that I hired a gentleman when he was 72 years old at the agency. He had been an account manager for Chevron worldwide. So he had a lot of responsibility. He walked into my office one day, had an appointment, but I didn't know what he wanted to see me about. And he said that I should hire him. And I said, well, why? But we've got an HR department. He says, no, they won't talk to me, I'm sure. He says, I'm talking to you. I know you need somebody for this particular account. Here's what I did. Here's my references. And I don't need a lot of money, but I can do the job for you. He worked for me for 7 years. And he was 72 when he walked in the door. He was the best person I ever had in that role.
So is retirement at the age of 65 a sort of fading concept? Do you think that that's being revised for most people?
Probably, because if we're going to live 20 years longer, we're probably going to work a bit longer as well.
Well, we say don't retire, rewire.
I like that. Here's a question. Do older workers with experience have an easier time finding jobs than recent college graduates? Jack, your thought on that?
I doubt it. I doubt it, because what you don't see for senior citizens, you don't see job fairs, you don't see much of that going on at all, where the college graduates, they are out recruiting those graduates. There aren't too many people out recruiting
Yeah, so there
people
are,
in their 70s anyway.
you need to do your networking, as you
Yes.
said. Of course, we're talking about people who are very fortunate and have a lot of skills, a big resume. We also have people in Hawaii who are needing to go and get minimum wage jobs in their later years, which is a challenge, right, and a harder thing. Jerry, have you seen much of that in terms of that situation?
Something I really can't comment on. Perhaps Dwight or Cullen would have a better feel for that.
Dwight, your thoughts on that? Have
You know,
seen that?
actually, we have a program, and it actually originated, I guess, with the war on poverty, back in the mid-'60s, that has continued. It's a small program that deals with workforce development, and actually it's the Senior Community Services Employment Program. It's essentially giving opportunity for training and, gaining skill sets to the unemployed, low income, and the other requirement is you have to be older than 55. So it's about a $2 million, per year allocation that we get from the feds. But this would attempt to address, the kind of situation and the kind of worker I think you just described.
In terms of Obamacare, I know that the legislature is trying to do something to address it, but there is sort of this increase in the cost of having an older employee because Obamacare has changed the criteria for health care coverage and the cost. And if you have older employees, your company costs are going to go up. Is that a challenge in terms of older workers finding placement at companies?
I think it could be, yeah. Certainly if the cost of healthcare increases, the employer has to figure out some way to deal with that. And as you may be aware, prepaid health has been in this state, and we've been the only state with prepaid health, which has kept us sort of ahead of the curve in terms of having a higher percentage of our population with some minimal level of healthcare coverage, under insurance. And with Obamacare, the one factor that has raised some concern is that it looks towards an age rating system as opposed to a community-based rating system which existed under, prepaid health, up to now. And we have heard anecdotes about substantial increases in healthcare premiums as a result, and this could potentially have an impact on the employer's choice in terms of who he or she is going to hire.
And of course, technically, it would be illegal for a company to choose who to hire based on that increase in premiums, correct? That shouldn't factor into the hiring.
No, it shouldn't. But, strangely enough, we find that probably about 40% of people who are over 50 and are out trying to get a job do face some sort of subtle discrimination. But the bottom line for this is the employer has to make a choice in terms of maybe the added cost for health care versus the added value that the older employee brings.
Yeah, I think that is, and a really important and crucial balancing, because even the early question about, you have an older worker with all that experience and knowledge, and you have a college, graduate, right, first job. I mean, the investment in training and time and how much that might pay off for you, as a company or your company in the long run, versus, someone who comes, with maybe a number of skill sets that it would take time for that college graduate to develop, especially in terms of developing relationships and those kinds of soft factors.
Yeah, but part of it also is looking not just at the hiring of the older versus younger, but you've got the older worker that is retiring and let out the door without any relationship with the company, whatsoever after that. And that's a huge loss to the company. There's a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of policies and procedures that's not written, for example, as far as how things are done. So if you keep some of those individuals, in the work pool, within the company, to help mentor the newer group that's coming up, the company would be so much better, I think.
Do any of you run into people who express disappointment because they thought they'd be able to retire and they can't afford to? Or does it always end up being a positive to continue to work? Any thoughts on that?
I think about 40% of people who continue to work are continuing because they have to. They acknowledge that. It's not that they dislike continuing to work, but that's a factor.
You know what I've seen is people that have retired and they have a sufficient amount of pension to cover their livelihood, but I see boredom taking place. Loneliness perhaps because there's your loss of the contact, and after perhaps taking care of the grandchildren who grow up or cleaning the garage that takes 6 months, they begin looking for things. And so that's a pattern, so whether or not it's volunteerism or some type of part-time job, they're looking for some way of making creating an engagement and making a difference, having an impact.
And for some people, it's opening their own business.
Yes.
And we see a lot of that going on these
I
days.
just read a statistic which surprised me. The 50-plus age group is the fastest growing age group to open their own business.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Lots of experience, yeah.
That's sort of taking a risk at a certain point in your life to open your own business. It's interesting. That reflects a lot of optimism, I suppose, to do that.
Well, maybe it also reflects a lot of confidence.
Yeah,
that
that's
you
true.
can do it.
A lot of network, too.
A lot of network. There we go. And you might as well make it pay off, right? Here's a comment. The elders' concern is not so much with pay, it is for health insurance. Good health insurance is gold. So maintaining insurance being an issue for people. Of course, this is not as much an issue for those who have worked for state, federal government. Insurance tends to be better and benefits better. Are we seeing this trend in state and federal workers to go back to work or continue in work? Dwight?
I think it does make sense that it would be a factor in any employee's planning for their future, just because of how much healthcare costs today. So if you again, because this is going to be the 40th year we've had prepaid health, in our state, and so for those workers who have coverage because of the amount of time they've worked with the employer, I think it's some sense of security that as long as they continue working, they will have that healthcare coverage in insurance. Whereas without that employment, they may be facing a whole different situation.
I know that was certainly a factor for me.
Insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, besides my wife, but anyway, it was the real fact. I mean, the bottom line was, and I should disclose, Jerry's the guy that hired me over here.
Smart
It takes
man.
an old guy to hire an old guy.
Absolutely.
The networking.
But no, that was really critical.
Can you talk about that? So when did you realize that was going to be an issue? Had you realized that when you were in the process of making that initial retirement in 2003?
Well, I think when I entered the workforce, we were planning for a retirement at 65 and probably an age into the mid-70s. That's not realistic anymore. So what we could see, even though we had done well, but we did lose a lot during the Depression.
Yeah.
What I think was a depression anyway.
As everyone did, right.
That wasn't going to carry us all the way through if we really had long lives. And so there was that part of it. But I think the major factor, one of the real temptations at Olelo was that I could do what I wanted to do and have fun at it, but their insurance coverage was terrific. And you combine that with Medicare, and I don't think we've had, for my wife and myself, any real out-of-pocket expense by having that as my primary and Medicare as my backup.
I think the thing, though, is that Jack has moved right along with the times. I mean, his capability right now with things like computer graphics, I mean, it's just accelerated. I mean, he's just the poster child for what an older worker can do.
Well, let me ask you this question then, because what can older workers do to remain relevant, especially when applying to younger bosses? We touched on this with HR, but do you have any other thoughts in terms of staying relevant? Is it taking computer classes, staying on top of everything that's happening in technology?
It's up here. It's all in the head. I think it's really in the head. You just have to want. I guess I'm into computers because that's what I did partially in my work, and I love it. Now that isn't for everybody, but if they know what they want to do, I think the key to finding work, and the key to in living longer, I really think is the key here, is finding the thing that you want to do. Chase your dream at last.
Chase your dreams.
Inspiring. In terms of computer knowledge, though, you were mentioning earlier that we might have sort of a dated stereotype in terms of, you know, the post-65 generation's comfort with computers and
Yes.
technology. Can you tell me about that?
Well, let's put it this way. I think that you'll find that, as I said, 50% of the over 50 are on Facebook. 2/3 of us text, and a number of us, and probably what should be a growing number, use LinkedIn, because that's the way to network these days. So you have to adapt. You have to develop. If you don't have them, you have to develop your computer skills.
That's what community colleges do well. Train some of these older adults in these areas.
So do you think most older people that are going to school are doing it with the idea of updating their skills to re-enter the workforce?
Not quite as much as they can, but this is certainly one area that we've been looking at, encore careers. We've got people that are, you know, leaving the workforce or thinking about their second act, so to speak, and they don't want to do what they were doing before, you know, the same way perhaps, but they've got some passion, they've got some dreams, and they've got some skill sets, and we've created this course, for example, that we've taught in the past called Encore Careers for Boomers. So through that process of looking at their skill set and their dreams and the kind of skill sets that's required, we find, you know, we try to determine what else they need, and then in most likelihood the place to get that would be at the community college, and then we help them, you know, point them in the direction that they need to move in.
What a great segue, because April is Encore Entrepreneur Month. And no, if you're interested in something like that, you can go to the AARP national website and you'll find a lot of information. You'll find webinars, because you can learn remotely.
So there are resources
There
for
are a lot of
anyone
resources
wanting
out
to
there.
make that transition. For those just joining us tonight, we're asking, what role can our aging population play in the workplace? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 on Oahu and 800-283-4847 from the neighbor islands. Dwight, this is a question from the Big Island, so I'm going to ask that of you.
Sure.
Your home island. Since older people are staying in the workforce, does the panel think that the Social Security retirement age should be raised? Is there any discussion of that on the government level? Of course, the Social Security, the age keeps getting, right, sorry, but the age keeps getting raised anyway, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I guess you know, a lot of it you know, will be determined in Congress, right? That being a federal issue, and how to make sure that the resources that are necessary to provide the reassurance, yeah, to our older Americans that the system was supposed to provide continues. I know that Congress has been dealing with, you know, a number of adjustments to prolong the life of the special fund, and I guess you know, I think that'll be one factor. Certainly we've discussed the financial circumstances that, you know, are tied into the situation. And I think more, we're going to need to, you know, maybe look at a shifting paradigm, yeah, that will help keep people more healthy, more engaged, provide for smoother transitioning, you know, that'll allow for, you know, that balancing and the best use of the older workers, while we continue to see how you know, the financial needs break down, whether it's to cover healthcare costs or just what's necessary, yeah, to provide for the expenses that older Americans have.
I suppose, though, from our earlier discussion, a lot of older workers are going into a job that didn't pay what it did, and that supplemental income from Social Security and retirement is important and key to making the whole equation work.
Let me tell you how important it is. First of all, I'll tell you right up front that AARP is absolutely opposed to changing the entry level for Social Security. And if you look at this state, you know, typical Social Security check is about $1,200 a month. 25% of all the people in Hawaii who receive Social Security, for them, that is 90% to 100% of their income. For another 25%, that's somewhere between 50% and 25%. So it is a very crucial safety net. And we're not about to do, well, let's put it this way, we'll do everything we can to not have Social Security changed.
It's already been raised to 67,
Yes, it
right?
has.
So it's no longer at 65 as it is.
And I think it's in keeping with, our values, yeah? If we go back again to, how we treat our kupuna and what they've meant in terms of the sacrifices they've made to provide sort of the quality of life, that we can enjoy here in Hawaii. And so I think that does tie into the kind of position I think AARP just expressed.
And especially with our higher cost of living over here, it means even more to people who are receiving Social Security.
Social Security and maintain, we might have families having to make up the difference, and that would create even more tensions and pressures, social strain in the community as well. So that's another consequence, possibly.
All right, from John in Haleiwa, I am 65 and a roofer. To be part of a team, you must get along with younger workers by keeping lines of communication open and treating them as equals. You must be compassionate as well as productive. I'm glad John raised this issue. What's important for older workers to know about getting along with other age groups within the workplace? I think, Jack, you were mentioning you need to not walk in like you want to run the company, right?
That's right.
Can you talk about that?
Intimidation can be a huge factor. You've got to demonstrate it. It's not up to them, it's up to you. And you've just got to prove to them that you're a part of the team and appreciate them and acknowledge them and train them. I mean, you know things they don't know. So, but if you do that in the right way, we've got a lot of young people at OL, and I hope they're all my friends, and I mean that sincerely.
And be able to use the skills you learned from decades in the workplace. All right, from Akasha on the Big Island, I am a 74-year-old nurse. I've spent the last 4 years trying to get a job because $1,000 is not enough to live on, but I don't get hired because of my age. I don't find fault with this, but I'm stuck. Any thoughts on that situation, which Akasha, I'm sure, is not alone?
That seems so strange because of the increased need for healthcare professionals.
So even at 74, it shouldn't be an issue?
No, not at all.
Yeah. On the Big Island, because of the nature of the rural communities, you look at Oahu and you look at the number of employment opportunities that exist, you'd think, especially in shortage categories, you'd have lots of opportunities. On the neighbor islands, basically you have the Hawaii Health Systems Corporation as the safety net out there. And, although I agree with you, it doesn't make sense where there's a real need in almost any community for those kinds of services. But, the circumstances there might, create,
So seniors luck finding an appropriate work situation might also be predicated upon where their life is.
Yes.
And if they're on neighbor island, it might be a little bit more limited.
It is tough, though, because, age discrimination continues to exist, lots of prejudice. Even in gerontology, which is the field that I work in, we're having great difficulties even getting kids to major in the field, even though they know that the numbers of older adults is going to continue to grow and there's going to be needs all over the place, not just in healthcare, but even in hospitality or in banking. If you don't know how to treat an older customer well, they can take their money and go elsewhere, So just understanding some of the trends in geronta, you would think that we would have more people taking the class, but it's been a challenge, and it's partly because there's this prejudice, People think that, well, the light's out, the light's on, but it's a little dim, So we've got this challenge. A lot of the concerns with regards to the older worker, we've got to constantly address that and then fight some of that kind of prejudice and discrimination.
America tends to be a youth culture.
Absolutely.
Even if Hawaii might be a little bit more attuned to multi-generational. Well, that's a question from Dan in Honolulu. Is there a real way to protect against ageism? Is there anything you four would like to see done that you think could help in this trend and in making people more comfortable with this? Any thoughts on that, Jerry?
Let me punt on this one.
Dwight?
There's culture change requires us to begin looking at celebrating older adults that have examples of age as an asset. We can have, let's say, for example, we've got senior recognition, for example, that the city does, from time to time. We can even look at intergenerational relations and have a photo contest with regards to how older adults, work with younger people and the great contributions that they provide. that is, we've got to find ways of celebrating older adults in terms of assets and making it known to more people. You know, it's a kind of culture change that we're
I'd
talking
like to add to that because I think, yeah, Cullen is right. You know, on the Big Island, they have every year sort of that celebration of outstanding older Americans. And it's a really nice program. You know, you have all of your senior centers, yes, spread throughout the Big Island, and each one sort of makes their own nomination of a member because of what they've done, because of what they've meant to the community, because of all of the contributions that they've made. And I think it's programs like that that, you know, kind of reinforce some of the values we have about, you know, honoring our seniors and about how they're a real treasure in terms of the impact they've had, and I'm sure it's not limited to, you know, rural communities. But I think that cultural change and that education of our community with a keener, I guess, a clearer sense of what a great asset and what older, you know, Americans, older workers also, you know, do for us as a people, as a community.
It seems particularly in Hawaii where so many mothers work. I mean, really, for those of us lucky to have enough to have family here, it's the older generation that sometimes makes it possible, right, for our generation to be able to be dual income households. For Dwight Takamine, are there a lot of part-time professional positions available for seniors who can no longer work full-time? From Ray and IAEA. Any thoughts on that?
Gee, that's a good question. Maybe I need to go back and research that. Yeah.
Any thoughts in terms of the finding part-time work versus full-time work? Have you seen that, Jack?
Well, no, I haven't. I'm not really involved in that area at all in terms of part-time. We do have some part-time employees, but they're all young. But I think, to your point, as a senior, I don't think we can use the excuse that there's bias out there, that there's prejudice, or that I'm being discriminated against because of my age. I think it's like finding any other job. You just got to set your mind to it, and it's really up to the individual. It's out there. You just got to go find it, and you got to find the right people. And so it may take a while.
Yeah.
We have one of your over 55s in our company now, and that came through your program in the city, I believe. And
But
he's great.
Yeah. No, I think Jack's right, and you know, it's that paradigm shift, right? I mean, if we can help educate our community, look, you know, these seniors, some of whom may become retirees, are wanting to give back, you know, whether through volunteer programs or whatever means, you know, and if we facilitate, you know, providing for those kinds of opportunities, then I hope the sense of appreciation, you know, for our kupuna, you know, will allow, you know, some of the concerns that were expressed, you know, earlier, hopefully to be less if there is that kind of bias.
But, you know, part-time work sometimes is the entryway to full-time work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it transitions in. From Nora via Twitter, at what age should elders leave the workforce? Good question.
When they're good and ready?
That's probably a good answer.
There are people working in their 80s and who are doing well. Let me just mention this. If anything, AARP is the poster child for what an older person can do. Our founder founded AARP at the age of 73. She founded an organization right now that's got 37 million members across the country and 150,000 in here. And she was actively engaged in AARP's business until she died 10 years later.
So do any of you actually think, though, there is some sort of limit in terms of when you think most people will probably want to leave the workforce? What is the new 65? If 40 is the new 30, what's the new 65 in terms of work?
Well, I don't know what would be the new 65, but I think that the message that we're trying to provide here, I think, is that we should not look at 65 as an arbitrary date when we should stop working. I think we should, if we feel that we have the capacity to work, and many of us do, and or some of us need to work because we just don't have the resources anymore, you know, that we were expecting, but so we have to work. But there are many others that can work and want to do something, should not look at the 65 as something that they need to pay attention to and stop completely, you know. As I mentioned, you know, we should you know, not retire, but to rewire. Try to think of other ways in which we can make a contribution. And it doesn't have to be paid work. It can be volunteerism that can convert into part-time work and then maybe to some consulting type work. Who knows, you know, but look at ways of continuing to remain engaged.
I don't plan to retire.
You're just going to keep on going.
Yeah, I think
We'll have you back in 10 years on
the
this.
time will come when either health
Yeah.
or I won't be making the contribution. Hopefully, and I mean, my driving force now is just to stay working, and that's, I have to prove my worth every day, just like any other employee, and so that doesn't allow you to age, you know, it just doesn't.
And 25% of the workforce, 50 plus, intends to do just what Jack is doing, to work, to continue to work.
Which is so different from perhaps how all of our grandparents might have seen retirement. It has really changed. From Gloria and Mo'ili'ili, mentorship is really important. Are there any organized programs in the state for placement of mentors over 50 in technology or related fields? Any type of mentorship program that you guys are aware of, or is that something you'd like to see happen?
I take a look at the Small Business Association, their SCORE program, because this is a group of retired executives, and they're basically there to help mentor. So there are programs out there, yes.
Right.
And it's almost any successful, you know, company. I mean, if you're going to get the greatest productivity out of your workforce, then, you know, the older workers tend to be models, role models, at times because of the experience or the knowledge that they have. And I think you do need this interaction, right, between the younger workers and the older workers, so that whether it's just modeling, being a mentor, sharing the kinds of values that will help promote, you know, the interests of the economic interests of the company, I think those are the kinds of dynamics that will probably define a more successful employer than not.
I'm sorry. I wanted to sort of follow up on this whole idea of finding mentors. And it has to also do with this whole question as to how do we help this retiring population transition and find their second act, so to speak. And when we look at senior care in general, we've got these senior handbooks, senior information and, you know, and an assistance handbook, but they're mostly listings of nursing homes and adult daycare centers and Meals on Wheels, assisted transportation, all of the sick care stuff. And this is very important. So we've done a fairly good job in terms of trying to put together an inventory of services that can help older adults under sick care, you know, aging as chronic care, aging as geriatric pathology type of a model. We haven't really created a similar handbook having to do with aging as an asset. And how do we, so right now I'm working with the Office on Aging and trying to see if we can pull together a resource directory, places where people can go to find work, mentorship, maybe some educational opportunities, maybe some volunteerism opportunities, you know, and put it all together so that when people are ready to move in that direction, there's at least a roadmap.
So that
yeah.
college counseling, exit out of
Absolutely.
college experience you were talking about, that would be nice for seniors.
Right, yeah, we can put
Right.
that all together in
Right.
there. So that's what we're working on right now.
That sounds like a good one. From Maggie and Kailua, a lot of companies offer buyouts to get workers to retire early. Do the panelists support this? Any thoughts on that?
So it's not forced.
It might be an opportunity for someone to
It
be able
might
to
be.
go look at a nonprofit
It might
or
be.
something.
Yeah, I think that's a good option for companies, if it's fair. There are buyouts that are good buyouts, and there are buyouts that aren't so good, I mean, in reality. And sometimes the buyouts are pretty forced. At least that's been my experience.
Any other thoughts on buyouts before we move on?
You know, I think Jack is right. I mean, there's, you know, the whole spectrum of circumstances, right? And if it works for, you know, the employer and it works for the employees, then, you know, why not? You know, the whole sense of fairness and, you know, that sort of thing. But if it's a win-win situation, certainly I don't see any problems with that. If it's forced, then there's other considerations.
It's unfortunate. From Susan via Cover It Live, political discrimination is also alive and well for people who have been public servants. Why is there such disregard for solid experience and knowledge of state retirees because of imagined political issues? Interesting. Do you think that there is discrimination for former state employees? We touched on the situation of state employees. Do you think it's harder for people coming out of state service to find other employment opportunities? Any thoughts on that, Dwight?
I'm not so certain. You know, I would think, going back to what Jack said, it's the skill set you bring, the impact you make.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a job and you can sell yourself and, you know, the skill sets meet the needs of the employer,
Go back
then
to
you
when you were
shouldn't.
21 and look for your job.
Right,
It's,
and
it's as simple as that.
Start
really.
over again. Cullen, you wanted to say?
I was looking at this political issue from a slightly different perspective. Dwight was in the legislature, but I had talked to one legislator many years ago, and he said that in the future it may not be where we have a Democratic Party and the Republican Party, with the way in which this kind of intergenerational conflict that could occur down the road. We could come up with a party for the young versus a party for the old. We could split society.
Ageism.
So this whole issue of giving back and somehow moderating that kind of tension is an important one, and that's a political thing that I wanted to kind of share.
And so the conflict between generations.
Between
you
generation
see.
is something that we need to be attentive to.
Okay, from Veronica and Hilo, a lot of hospitality workers are losing jobs as hotels switch to timeshares. What can they do to make up for the loss of income? So older hospitality workers getting squeezed out. Is that something that you're seeing?
I think in some instances, yes. And the conversion a lot of times has to do with the economic benefits, right? Whether it's the developer or the owner, of the project. I'm not so sure what tools are available to impact on that. Certainly you have in hotel situations, a lot of times the presence of a union that will at least be able to be in a position to negotiate with the employer or, the owner of the project so that you can provide for greater fairness or, work opportunity or those kinds of things. In the absence of that, it seems as though it's going to be a harder challenge.
Yeah, I think the challenge for the state is that whole tourism industry is changing. And really what we're seeing, it's not that these owners are trying to boot employees out. They just don't need as many. They buy the property because the market wants condos. And if they wanted hotel rooms, then it would go the other way. But it's really a market force issue that is causing it.
The flip side, there's also hotels in Waikiki that are worrying that their housekeeping staff is starting to age out and they're not sure they're going to be able to find. So there's all sorts of different situations for different workers. Anonymous from Maui, how does a person network? I have heard the word but don't understand how to do it. So if you are in an older age group, what is the best place to do the networking you were talking about, Jack?
What I was doing was, and this was true in consulting probably as much as it was in terms of finding a job. If I didn't know, if I had a target and I didn't know anyone that I could network that I thought, I'd get to know someone there. I mean, that would be my objective. Find a person at the level I want to get and get to know them.
And just call them up?
It's a little more complicated than that. But
ask if someone knows them.
And it takes some time and it takes some research. But it doesn't cost you anything to do that. And make a friend out of them. And get that referral. If they get to know you and they think, hey, this is a good guy, he'd really help our company, that's going to get you in the door eventually if you work it.
Dwight?
Gina, just to add to that, at least it's been my experience that Hawaii is such a small place, from one perspective. I mean, people know each other. Relationships matter. And the more you have the people skills, I think that assists you no matter what the nature of your job may be. And I think even that's being embraced even in our public education system, looking for, developing the kind of student who when they graduate will be able to interact and work with others. And I think that's sort of one of the beginning points in terms of developing that network, whether it's professional or otherwise. And, in its simplest form, it's just the friends that you have, that you trust, that you work with, that that make a difference in your life.
Cullen, have you seen examples of how networking can make a real difference for people in that age group?
Well, participating in some of these associations or volunteer organizations that are related to the area that you're interested in. For example, I'm in gerontology, so we've got a Hawaii Pacific Gerontological Association. There are ways in which you can attend some of these meetings, volunteer, because there's always a need for some assistance here and there, and then you get to know people in the area, and then you can be introduced to others. So just be of help, yeah, and all the people skills that Dwight is talking about, of course, is invaluable.
I think this will be our last question from Ross in Volcano. Can seniors help our state educational system? Is that a field that you're seeing? We talked about nonprofits. Seniors get involved in terms of helping at schools if they've got experience.
Oh, absolutely. You got substitute teaching, the community schools for adults. We got kids that are working on their GED. They need mentoring. We got immigrants that are working on their citizenship, and they need assistance with learning their English language. So there's lots of opportunities like that we can provide.
And I believe you have Kupuna
Yeah.
programs where
Absolutely.
cultural values,
Absolutely.
and all of that, such an important thing in terms of, then being able to be a contributing member of the community. And I think those are all important,
My
important.
mother is 95 today, but until the age she was 85, she didn't have a college degree, so she wasn't a teacher. But she's been assisting in classrooms, elementary classrooms, since she was 50.
Wonderful. So the sky is the
She
limit.
was
It's your
getting,
guys'
she was
question
getting
tonight.
paid for it, but
Point
not
tonight.
nearly what they'd have to pay for another teacher,
right,
right?
right,
And she
right.
enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you all, gentlemen, so much this evening. It's been a really wonderful conversation. Next time on Insights, Hawaii's beaches are a valuable resource for residents and tourists alike, but beach erosion, overfishing, destruction of our coral reefs, shark attacks, and even molasses spills are ongoing issues for local residents. Next week on Insights on PBS Hawaii, what is the state of Hawaii's ocean waters? I'm Malia Mattoch. Ahui ho.